I'm 28, and I've been married to my husband, Sean, who's also 28, for 2 years now. Sean and I dated for a couple of years before tying the knot, but we've known each other since high school. Back then, we weren't close, more like acquaintances with overlapping friend groups. After high school, we lost touch when Sean moved out of state for college. Life happened, and we didn't cross paths again until years later, when we ran into each other at a restaurant. We exchanged numbers, went on a few dates, and the rest, as they say, is history. Before me, Sean had dated Diane, a girl from our high school a year younger than us. They'd been together since middle school, and back then, it seemed like they were destined to be together forever. I'd often seen them around school, the couple everyone thought would make it. But things changed. When I met Sean again all those years later, I asked him what had happened with Diane. He told me she'd dumped him a year and a half before we reconnected. She wanted different things and space to explore the world, which in reality meant being single and dating other people while keeping Sean on the back burner as an option. Despite the breakup, Sean and Diane stayed friends, though they kept their contact to a minimum. By the time he and I started dating, Sean had mostly moved on from her. He wasn't the same guy I remembered from high school. He'd matured, grown into himself, and we clicked easily. He would tell me that what we had was so different from his relationship with Diane. With her, he always felt like he had to chase to prove his worth. She'd flirt with other guys, disappear for days without a word, and never consider how her behavior affected him. He stayed with her for as long as he did out of some misguided loyalty and the pressure of their shared history. But that wasn't all. Sean's mother, Sharon, adored Diane. Sharon, who's 49 now, had always been Diane's biggest cheerleader. During the years Sean and Diane were together, she'd treated Diane like a daughter, constantly praising her and doting on her. Diane played into this perfectly, showering Sharon with compliments and gossiping about everyone, even Sean's aunts and cousins. Sharon loved that, and Diane, with her conventional beauty and charm, only solidified Sharon's obsession with her. Even after Sean and Diane broke up, Sharon continued inviting Diane to family events and holiday dinners. Sean tried to talk to his mom to get her to stop, but Sharon brushed him off, insisting that she and Diane were still friends. It was weird, to say the least, and when Sean introduced me to his family, I felt the awkwardness immediately. The first time I met them was at Christmas 4 years ago, about 8 months after Sean and I started dating. Diane was there, of course. The whole time, she made sly remarks about my looks, my clothes, my makeup, everything. She was clever, passing it off as humor, but I could tell what she was doing. Sean noticed too and tried to step in, but Sharon shut him down and turned to me, asking if I had a problem with Diane's jokes. I knew that if I said yes, I'd be painted as insecure, so I shrugged it off and said, "I don't care." The way their faces dropped told me I'd done the right thing, even if it was petty. Sean apologized to me when we got home and said he'd ask his mom to stop inviting Diane, but I told him not to. I didn't want to give Sharon and Diane the satisfaction of thinking they'd gotten to me. I wanted to prove that I was unbothered and that their little games didn't faze me. Sean was surprised but respected my decision and didn't push it further. Over the next few years, Sharon kept inviting Diane to every family event, and each time it was the same thing. Snide comments, backhanded compliments, and constant reminders of Diane's past with Sean. They'd talk about it as if I wasn't even in the room. Sharon would hint that Diane was the better choice, the daughter-in-law she'd have preferred. It was infuriating, but I kept my cool. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd gotten under my skin. As long as Sean was with me and on my side, I could handle it. But things came to a head 3 days ago at Sharon's 49th birthday party. This year, Sean wanted to skip the party altogether and go to his coworker's engagement celebration instead. The timing was unfortunate, but Sean was close to this coworker, and he'd only get engaged once. Sharon, however, guilted him into attending her party, wearing him down with calls and messages until he agreed. Reluctantly, we decided to go, but planned to leave after the cake cutting to make it to the engagement party. The moment we arrived, I saw Diane. She was dressed to the nines, more so than usual, and Sharon looked equally overdone, though it was her birthday, so it made sense. We mixed with the guests and waited for the cake to be brought out. At around 5:30, Sean's dad walked in carrying 2 cakes, which surprised us. One clearly said, "Happy birthday, Sharon," but the other was decorated with the words, "Happy almost anniversary." Before we could ask what it meant, Diane stepped forward and grabbed Sean's arm, pulling him to her side. We were both too stunned to react. The room fell silent, eyes turning to them as Diane launched into a speech about how, exactly 10 years ago on Sharon's birthday, Sean had given her a promise ring. She proudly showed the ring off to everyone, the same ring she'd worn for all these years. Sharon beamed, clapping her hands and cheering them on as if this were some grand nostalgic moment. Diane then hugged Sean, who stood stiff as a board, not returning the embrace. Sharon, grinning ear to ear, fed Diane a slice of the anniversary cake before turning to Sean, who stepped back, his face a mix of shock and anger. When Sharon asked him what was wrong, it was like a dam broke. Sean erupted, his voice shaking with anger as he shouted at both of them. He called them shallow, selfish, and delusional, admitting that he was ashamed to be related to Sharon and regretted ever being involved with Diane. It was raw, and it stunned everyone, including me. Sean was usually calm, the kind of guy who avoided conflict, so seeing him lose it like that was jarring. After his outburst, he grabbed my hand, and we left. We caught a cab to his coworker's engagement party, and though Sean was visibly upset, he refused to talk about it. I didn't push him, sensing he needed space. At the engagement party, surrounded by friends and laughter, his mood gradually improved, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. When we got home that night, I thought he'd finally want to talk about what happened. But instead, he turned the conversation on me. He said that while he knew Sharon and Diane's actions were humiliating and disrespectful, he was also frustrated with me. I'd been the one who, for years, had insisted we let things slide, staying silent to prove I was unaffected. In doing so, I'd made him suppress his own feelings, forcing him to bear the weight of his mother's and Diane's actions in silence. I was taken aback. I argued that he was being unfair and that I was trying to be strong for both of us. But as I lay awake that night, his words echoed in my mind. Maybe he was right. I'd been so focused on winning a game I didn't even want to play that I hadn't considered how it affected him. And that realization hit me harder than anything Diane or Sharon had ever said. The next morning, Sean and I went about our day in a tense silence. He was still distant, and I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at me. I thought back over the years, every dinner, holiday, and birthday where Diane had been there, making snide remarks and subtly belittling me, while Sharon watched with a knowing smile. Each time I'd held my head high, refusing to let them see me falter. But I hadn't thought about what it was doing to Sean. He'd stood by me through every insult and every uncomfortable moment, but I'd never once asked him how he felt about it. I just assumed he was fine because he didn't say otherwise. I couldn't let things continue this way. That evening, I decided it was time to do something I rarely did, be vulnerable. I skipped work, picked up takeout from Sean's favorite restaurant, and even bought a chocolate cake with "I'm sorry" written on it. It felt cheesy and out of character, but Sean loved those grand rom-com style gestures, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. When Sean came home and saw the setup, his surprised expression softened the wall between us. He set down his bag and glanced at the table, then at me. "What's all this?" he asked, his tone careful and guarded. I took a shaky breath. "It's me admitting that I messed up," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was so caught up in proving myself to Diane and your mom that I forgot to consider you. I'm sorry, Sean. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there, taking it all in. Then he walked over, pulled me into his arms, and whispered, "I forgive you." Relief washed over me, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. We sat down at the table, eating and talking for hours, peeling back the layers of frustration and misunderstanding that had built up over the years. I admitted how much I hated showing any sign of weakness, and how I'd convinced myself that looking unfazed was more important than acknowledging my pain. Sean listened, holding my hand, nodding as I explained my reasons. "I get it now," he said after a while. "I understand why you did what you did, but it's not just you dealing with them, it's both of us. And I need you to let me handle it when I need to." We reached a new understanding that night. It wasn't just about me standing up to Sharon and Diane, it was about us facing them as a team, allowing each other the space to feel, react, and protect ourselves. In the days that followed, I noticed a shift in Sean. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. There was a lightness to him, a sense that he was no longer carrying the burden alone. We decided it was time to address Sharon and Diane once and for all, but not in the way they expected. We'd agreed to put boundaries in place. No more pretending, no more silent tolerance. A few days later, Sean showed me a series of texts from Sharon. She had been bombarding him with messages, demanding that he apologize to Diane, whom she claimed was devastated by the way Sean had yelled at her at the party. I felt my blood boil as I read her words. It was almost laughable how she painted Diane as the victim when she'd been the one trying to humiliate me in front of everyone. Sharon's justification was that the anniversary cake and the speech were just jokes, that Sean had overreacted. She's unbelievable, I muttered, scrolling through the messages. She is, Sean said, his jaw clenched, and I'm done with it. We talked that night and decided it was time to cut off contact. Sean blocked Sharon and Diane on all platforms. It felt drastic, but the peace it brought was immediate. His dad, however, was a different story. Sean called him to explain, and while his dad was understanding, he made it clear that he wouldn't intervene. He loved his wife and knew he couldn't change her, so he chose to stay neutral. I could tell it hurt Sean, but he accepted it. It was a choice he had to make for his own sanity. For the next 2 days, things were blissfully quiet. No texts, no calls, just the calm that comes with drawing a line in the sand. But then, out of nowhere, Sean got a call from his maternal uncle saying that Sharon had fallen down the stairs and fractured her leg. The news hit him hard, and before I could suggest we think it through, he was grabbing his keys and heading to the hospital. I followed, my heart pounding with dread. We reached the hospital around the same time, but as we walked toward the entrance, we were stopped in our tracks. There, waiting for us in the parking lot, stood Sharon and Diane, completely fine. No cast, no crutches, nothing. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They had faked the accident to get Sean's attention. Before I could say anything, Diane rushed up to Sean, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. "Sean, please just listen, it was all a joke. I never meant to upset you," Sharon chimed in, acting like we were the unreasonable ones. "You can't just cut me out, Sean. I'm your mother." Sean's face was a mask of controlled fury. He listened for a moment, then took a deep breath and said, "Both of you need to back off. I'm done. Don't contact me again." He turned on his heel and walked away, not waiting for their reactions. I followed him to our car, my heart thudding in my chest. As we drove away, Sharon's voice echoed in the distance, but I couldn't make out the words. It didn't matter. We were done. When we got home, Sean's hands were shaking. "I can't believe they did that," he said, his voice low, almost defeated. I quote, "I'm sorry," I whispered, placing my hand on his. "You deserve better than this." "So do you," he said, squeezing my hand. And in that moment, I knew we were stronger than ever. The days that followed felt like a surreal mix of relief and disbelief. Sean and I had finally drawn a line, and while the sense of freedom was refreshing, the sting of betrayal lingered. I knew Sharon was persistent, but the fact that she would go so far as to fake an injury just to manipulate Sean was something I hadn't anticipated. It cemented what we already knew. There was no reasoning with her or Diane. Sean's phone stayed silent for a while, which was a welcome change. We settled into a routine, enjoying the quiet moments that had been so rare before. But I knew it was only a matter of time before Sharon tried something else. I could see the anticipation in Sean's eyes whenever a message pinged on his phone or a number he didn't recognize called. He would glance at it, and I'd catch the flicker of tension before he let out a breath and set it down. One afternoon, I was at work when my phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, and I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. The moment I answered, a shrill voice erupted on the other end. "How dare you turn Sean against me?" It was Sharon. My heart sank, the hairs on my arms standing on end. She was yelling so loudly that my coworkers turned to look at me, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. Sharon, "This isn't the time or place," I started, but she cut me off. You quote, "V poisoned him against his own mother. And for what? To satisfy your petty need to be the only woman in his life? You're pathetic." I hung up mid-rant, my hands shaking as I stared at my phone. The room around me seemed to buzz with silent tension. I took a deep breath and put my phone on silent, determined to finish my workday without letting her get to me. When I got home that evening, Sean was waiting for me, his expression tense. "She called me too," he said, seeing the look on my face before I even spoke. "I blocked her again, but she's relentless." I sighed, dropping my bag by the door. "I know. She called me at work, yelling about how I've poisoned you." A shadow crossed Sean's face, and he shook his head. "I can't believe she's doing this." I knew she was manipulative, but this is a new low. We sat down and talked for a long time, making sure we were on the same page. Sean decided to take it one step further. Blocking her wasn't enough anymore. We needed to protect ourselves, not just from Sharon's antics, but from the potential for escalation. It was clear she wasn't going to back down easily. The next morning, we reached out to an attorney to discuss filing a restraining order. It felt drastic, but after everything Sharon and Diane had done, it was the only option left to create distance. The attorney listened carefully as we detailed the incidents, from the fake injury at the hospital to the coffee shop ambush. She nodded as we spoke, jotting down notes and asking questions to clarify the details. "Given the pattern of behavior, you have a strong case," she said finally. "But keep in mind, Restraining orders can escalate situations if the other party doesn't respond well. Are you prepared for that? I glanced at Sean, who nodded firmly. We are, he said. His voice was steady, but I could see the strain in his eyes. This wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. A few days later, the paperwork was filed and we were waiting to hear back from the court. We both knew this wasn't going to be the end of it, but it was a step toward reclaiming our peace. Then, as if to prove us right, something happened that made our decision feel even more justified. It was a Thursday, and I was making my usual stop at the coffee shop near my office for a frappuccino. I just walked through the door when I saw them, Sharon and Diane, sitting at a table by the window. My heart dropped, but before I could back out, they spotted me. In an instant, they were on their feet, coffee cups in hand. I barely had time to register what was happening before they threw their drinks at me, splashing hot coffee all over my face and clothes. Diane smirked as she scooped whipped cream from her cup and smeared it into my hair. The shock froze me in place, and for a moment the whole world seemed to pause. The baristas sprang into action, rushing to my side with napkins and helping me wipe off the mess, while other customers gasped and muttered in disbelief. One woman asked if I wanted to call the police, and I nodded numbly, still processing what had just happened. The police arrived quickly, and statements were taken. Sharon and Diane were fined, but since no real physical harm had been done, it didn't amount to more than a misdemeanor charge. Still, it went on their record, and that was something. Sean was furious when I told him what happened. He wanted to go public, to post about it on social media, and let everyone know who these women really were. But when he saw how shaken I was, he changed his mind. I just wanted to move past it without more public attention. That night, as we sat on the couch, Sean wrapped his arm around me. We're going to move forward, no matter what they do, he said. His eyes held a fierce determination that reassured me. We will, I echoed, leaning into him. The incident had been terrifying, a reminder that Sharon and Diane were willing to go further than we'd thought. But it also reinforced that cutting them out of our lives was the right decision. We spent the next few weeks finalizing plans to move. It wasn't just about leaving behind the memories of the last few years. It was about starting fresh, somewhere Sharon and Diane couldn't touch us. We also decided that when the time came to start our own family, they wouldn't be a part of it. They'd forfeited that right with their behavior. Sean's father reached out once, asking if we could find some way to mend fences for the sake of the family. Sean listened but held firm. Dad, I love you, but I can't keep doing this. Not for her, not for Diane, and not for the sake of appearances. It was painful but necessary. We were building a new chapter, one where we could breathe freely without the shadow of Sharon's manipulation or Diane's pettiness hanging over us. The weeks after the coffee shop incident were tense, but they were also filled with small victories. Sean and I filed for the restraining order, and while we waited for the court to process it, we focused on packing up our lives and preparing for a fresh start. It was empowering to take control, to make choices that prioritized our peace over the dysfunction we'd grown used to. The more we distanced ourselves from Sharon and Diane, the lighter we felt. One evening, while I was wrapping up boxes in the living room, Sean came home looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in weeks. He dropped his keys on the table and walked over to give me a kiss. I heard back from the attorney today, he said, his voice steady. The hearing for the restraining order is set for next week. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Good. It's time we had this settled, Dot. He nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at me. We're almost there, Dot. Despite the looming hearing, we kept our spirits up by focusing on our plans. We talked about what our new home would look like, what kind of furniture we'd get, and where we'd put the pictures of us and our friends. It felt like reclaiming our future, a future without the shadows of his mother or ex. Sean even joked about starting our Sunday pancake tradition early, a small symbol of the new life we were carving out for ourselves. But Sharon and Diane weren't done with us yet. The day before the hearing, I got another call from an unknown number. I ignored it, but the voicemail they left chilled me to the bone. It was Diane, her voice laced with bitterness. You think you can just erase me? I was here first, and I'll always be a part of Sean's life. Don't think you've won. I played the message for Sean, and his expression darkened. This is harassment, he said, jaw clenched. I'm going to tell our attorney. The next day at the hearing, we presented everything. The staged fall at the hospital, the coffee shop assault, and Diane's voicemail. Sharon and Diane were there too, sitting at the other side of the courtroom with expressions ranging from indignant to smug. Sharon didn't look at me once, her eyes fixed on Sean as if willing him to look back at her. He never did. When it was Diane's turn to speak, she tried to play the victim, painting herself as the scorned ex who was just trying to maintain a relationship with a family she'd known her whole life. Sharon backed her up, her voice dripping with false sincerity as she talked about family bonds and misunderstandings. I watched Sean as they spoke. His face was impassive, but I knew him well enough to see the storm brewing behind his eyes. When it was his turn, he stood up, took a deep breath, and spoke with a calm that made me proud. For years, I've put up with manipulation and disrespect disguised as concern. I stayed silent to keep the peace and to spare feelings. But that silence has cost me and my wife our peace of mind, our safety, and our happiness. This isn't about family bonds or misunderstandings. This is about boundaries that have been crossed repeatedly. I'm done staying silent. The judge listened, eyes darting between Sean and the two women who had caused so much chaos. After a long pause, he nodded. Given the evidence, the restraining order is granted. The relief that washed over me was indescribable. Diane's face fell, and Sharon's eyes widened in disbelief. They would have to stay away from us or face legal consequences. When we left the courtroom, the sun was bright, almost blinding. It felt like a new chapter had truly begun. Sean squeezed my hand as we walked to the car, a small smile playing on his lips. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "We really did. But even with the restraining order in place, the ripples of what had happened took time to settle." Sean's dad reached out again, asking if we could talk. I agreed, partly for Sean's sake and partly because I wanted some closure. We met at a quiet cafe, just the three of us. His dad looked older, more worn out than I remembered. He sipped his coffee and sighed. "I wish things hadn't come to this," he said, glancing at Sean. "Your mom, she's not going to change, but I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner." Sean's eyes softened, but there was no hesitation in his voice when he replied, "I know, Dad, but I need you to understand that we can't go back to how things were. We're moving forward, and that doesn't include her or Diane. His dad nodded slowly, the weight of acceptance in his eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. When we got home, we began the final stages of packing. Boxes were piled up in the living room, and the walls were bare, stripped of everything that had once made the place feel like home. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt ready for something new. That night, Sean and I sat on the floor of our nearly packed-up living room, a pizza box open between us. We talked about the future, not in vague, hopeful terms, but in real plans. Where we'd go, what we'd build, the life we'd make that was just ours. "I think this is the happiest I've been in a long time," he said, taking a bite of pizza and smiling at me with his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Me too," I said, leaning against him. "And it's only going to get better." For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. The days turned into weeks, and the move was finally complete. Our new house was smaller but cozy, filled with natural light and the promise of new beginnings. The past few years felt like a heavy storm we'd weathered together, and now we stood on the other side, wiser, scarred, but unbroken. The restraining order held, and for the first time in years, there was silence. No calls, no surprise visits, just peace. Sean and I focused on making our new place a home. We spent our weekends picking out furniture, arguing playfully over throw pillows and kitchen appliances, and deciding where to hang our favorite photos. One evening, as we set up a new bookshelf, Sean paused and looked at me, a thoughtful smile on his face. "Do you realize we haven't had a single interruption in weeks?" he said, his voice soft with disbelief. I laughed, leaning against the armrest of the couch. "I know, it's almost eerie, but it's nice, right?" He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "More than nice, it's everything." Life began to settle into a rhythm. Sean took on a big project at work, and I found myself diving deeper into my own career, enjoying the newfound focus that came with a drama-free life. Even though we were busy, we made time for each other. We'd go for walks after dinner, talking about everything and nothing, savoring the simplicity of being together without any dark clouds hovering above us. Occasionally, Sean's dad would call to check in, careful never to mention Sharon or Diane. It was as if we had an unspoken agreement. We would acknowledge him, but not the parts of the past that were best left untouched. It was a compromise that worked, and for Sean, it was enough. One Saturday, as we were sorting through the last of the moving boxes, I found an old photo album. It was one of Sean's, filled with memories from his high school and college days. We sat down on the floor, flipping through the pages and laughing at his awkward teenage haircuts and cheesy grins. Then we turned a page, and there she was, Diane, smiling brightly in a group photo from prom night. My smile faltered for just a moment before I caught Sean's gaze. He looked at the photo, then at me, a mixture of nostalgia and something heavier passing over his features. "I don't regret any of it," he said quietly. "Not the lessons, not even the mistakes. They brought me here, to this moment, with you. I reached out and laced my fingers with his. And I'm glad they did. We closed the album and set it aside, ready to move forward. The memories were there, but they no longer had power over us. We were building something stronger, rooted in trust, and the resilience that came from surviving the worst together. A few weeks later, Sean came home with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "I have news," he said, pulling me into a dance in the middle of the kitchen. "The project I've been working on, it's done, and they loved it. I'm getting a promotion." I squealed, hugging him tight. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. We celebrated that night with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. We sat on our patio, the night sky above us and the future wide open. It was during moments like these that I realized just how much we'd gained by letting go of what weighed us down. The distance from Sharon and Diane wasn't just physical, it was emotional freedom. It allowed us to focus on what truly mattered, us. Sean's smile that night was one I'd carry with me forever. It was full of relief, joy, and the peace that comes from knowing we were no longer tethered to the past. We were free. Months passed, and with each day, we felt more settled. We even started talking seriously about starting a family. The thought of raising children in a home filled with love and laughter, without the shadows of manipulation and rivalry, made me feel hopeful. Sean's eyes would light up whenever we talked about it, and I knew we were ready for this next chapter. But before that could happen, there was one more piece of closure we hadn't expected. One afternoon, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was from Sharon. My breath caught as I handed it to Sean, who stared at it for a moment before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter, shaky and almost illegible. "Sean, I know you may never forgive me, but I need you to know I'm sorry. Sorry for everything I did that hurt you and your wife. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I see now what I refused to see before. I was wrong, and I hope one day you can find it in your heart to understand that. He read the letter twice, his face unreadable. Then he folded it and set it aside. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew this wasn't a bridge we were ready to rebuild, but it was a step. It was acknowledgement, something we never thought we'd get. Sean looked at me, a small, bittersweet smile on his lips. "I guess it's finally over," he said. I nodded, reaching for his hand. "Yeah, it is. And as we sat there in the quiet of our home, I felt a sense of peace settle over us. We were stronger, ready for whatever came next. Because this time, we were facing it together. On our own terms. Story 2, 4 years after my vasectomy, my wife is expecting a child. I thus had my child and myself tested. Okay, so let's get started. I'll do my best to describe the problem, but I really don't know how to start. My wife and I have been wed for 6 years. Things simply kind of clicked when we first met in college. When you first meet someone, everything seems to fall into place. We were like that. During our senior year, we moved in together, went through exams together, and even graduated without murdering each other. I knew I wanted to be with her for the rest of my life by the time we crossed that stage. The fall following graduation, we were married. The first several years were enjoyable. We took several trips, experimented with our new careers, and figured out how to live together. But after that, we began to consider everything, even family, become a little more somber. We discussed the future, children, and everything else. To give us a chance to create a family, she stopped using birth control. After that, her libido skyrocketed. She was a whole different person. We became closer than before, like we were both eager to move forward with one another. But here's the deal. It wasn't simple to start a family. Year after year, month after month, nothing. We would get excited if her period was late, and then, the disappointment would set in. To be honest, it was difficult. We made an effort not to worry too much about it, assuming it would occur when it was supposed to. We eventually received the positive test after 3 arduous years. I thought that was it, guy. Everything seemed worthwhile. When our daughter was born, we were ecstatic. It fulfilled every desire I had ever had. I gave it my all as a father. Diaper changes, restless nights, you name it. All of that didn't bother me. I thought I was doing something right since this was our small family. And my wife was an excellent mother. It felt like a rather full life, and whatever minor problems we experienced previously seemed to vanish. My wife made the decision to resume using birth control after we had our baby. However, this is when the strangeness began. This time she found it difficult. She had several adverse consequences, you name it, mood swings, nausea, etc. No matter how many times her doctor changed her medicines, nothing seemed to help. We finally came to the conclusion that perhaps it wasn't worth it. I offered to have a vasectomy because we were still debating getting another child. It simply appeared to be the simpler choice. Furthermore, if we ever had second thoughts, it could be undone. I thus went ahead and did so. We have been living our life without any baby concern for the past 3 years. And to be honest, the closeness aspect of things improved even more. Because we didn't have to worry, we were able to enjoy each other with a sense of freedom. Then something seemed strange a few weeks ago. In addition to my wife's tardiness, I saw that she was acting strangely. I didn't first give it much thought because, as I mentioned, that wasn't out of the ordinary for her. But after that, I noticed more indications. In the morning, she experienced waves of nausea and a painful chest. A strange, nervous pit formed in my gut. Since I was aware that I had undergone a vasectomy, it made no sense for her to be pregnant. The symptoms were there, though, as clear as day. To be sure, I made the decision to investigate things myself. I didn't tell my wife that I had gone to the doctor to have my sperm count examined since, to be honest, I didn't want to give her any more stress in case this was just a hormonal hiccup or something. When I received the findings a few days later, my doctor told me quite simply that I was still infertile. My vasectomy had been successful. I felt as though I had been hit in the stomach at that very moment. I simply stood there, attempting to comprehend the meaning of that. My mind was racing, but I didn't want to draw any conclusions too quickly. Perhaps it's simply some weird coincidence, I thought. I couldn't let it go even though I tried to convince myself that this couldn't mean what I believed it to imply. I thus took a step that I never would have otherwise taken. My daughter and I went for a DNA test. I was internally tormented by that choice. Who, after all, wanders around wondering if their child is truly theirs? I had to know, though, and I'll tell you. Some of the longest days of my life were spent waiting for the findings. My heart ached every time I gazed upon her. I kept asking myself, if I have to do this at all, what kind of data am I? However, I couldn't get rid of that instinct. When the findings were eventually received, I was by myself. I read the words that would alter everything as I tore open the envelope. I didn't have a biological daughter. To be honest, I am at a loss for words. The earth seemed to have vanished under me. All of the memories, the few moments spent teaching her language and observing her sleep. Everything felt broken during those silent moments when it was just the two of us. I was unsure of how to respond. I wanted to hurl something, weep, and shout. However, I sat there feeling nothing. I didn't believe it. As if I were witnessing the disintegration of someone else's life. However, it dawned on me that I needed to discuss it with my wife. I needed answers. I wasted no time when she got home that evening. I gave her the exam to see. The evidence? She turned pale. And although I briefly believed she may try to deny it, she didn't. Like a deer caught in headlights, she simply gazed at me. I directly asked her whether she had dated someone else. After first stuttering, she finally acknowledged that she had. She vowed that it was an error and that she never intended to do me any harm. Her comments seemed to just bounce off me even though I was listening. I was unable to even comprehend them. I had just had my entire life turned upside down. She was telling me that it was an error. She made an effort to apologize and explain that she had been under a lot of stress and that she never intended for things to get to this point. However, my only thought was, how could she have done this to us? To our household? I inquired, as to if she had anything further she wanted to share with me. She insisted that this was the only time she had ever done something like. However, I wasn't sure if I could trust her. She pleaded with me to pardon her. Said she would stop at nothing to make this right. If I wanted to, I could even end the pregnancy. Feeling like a stranger in my own life, I just sat there. I spent the evening trying to make sense of everything while sitting on the couch and gazing up at the ceiling. From here, I had no idea what to do or where to go. I lost all I believed to be true about her and my life. A few days after receiving the most devastating news of my life, I'm still in full disarray. I'm at a loss for what to say. And worse, I'm at a loss for words to speak to my wife. Since that night, we have seldom spoken. What should I say to the woman who has been deceiving me for an unknown amount of time? I am aware that her confessional expression wasn't phony, and it makes me even more messed up. Because if she truly felt regret, that indicates that she kept me in the dark while knowing exactly what she was doing the entire time. I feel numb most of the time. I feel as though I'm there, but not quite alive. I quote, am simply living my life, going through the motions and attempting to keep my cool around my kid. The hardest thing is that I feel so confused and guilty every time I look at her. She is only a child, our child, or so I believed. Furthermore, I don't want her to be impacted by any of this. I'm unsure of what to do next, and she has no idea what's happening. I wanted to demand every last detail after my wife's confession. Who was this man? What time did it occur? What caused it to occur? But then I thought perhaps I didn't want to know. Although I admit that I was curious, I also know that once I find out, there's no turning back. The impression you have of someone just falls apart as soon as you hear the details. And I don't think I'm capable of handling it at the moment. Every possibility that may possibly happen is already tormenting me in my head. All of them. But what if I've been occupying myself to keep myself sane? I constantly thinking about what I should do next while working and avoiding eye contact with my wife. Shall I remain with her? For the benefit of our daughter, figure it out. Or should I just give up? To be honest, it seems like both solutions are terrible. Indeed, I may be overanalyzing. But when every peaceful moment only raises new questions, what else can I do? Our brief communication has been really uncomfortable. Her goal is to be kind. It just doesn't feel right to ask whether I'm all right or if I want something to eat. She seems to be attempting to patch together a failing ship. She's been hovering more lately, as if she's worried that the moment she turns away, I'll pack up and go. The strangest thing is that, absurdly, I almost feel sorry for her. It was she who brought us here. Nevertheless, she appears depressed and anxious, which makes me feel horrible. It quote s a mess. I eventually lost it last night and begged her to tell me everything. I was at my breaking point. She inhaled deeply, paused, and then began to speak. I just stared at her the entire time she was speaking, looking for any indication that she was lying. It resembled a slow-motion train accident. She continued talking about how the stress, rituals, and tiredness of parenting were overwhelming her. And I understand that. Being a parent is difficult, but is it difficult enough to ruin a family? It seemed like a smack in the face to hear her excuse. She vowed fervently that it would only happen once. It was a pointless moment with no significance. To me, it meant everything, even if she insisted it didn't. How could she have thrown all we owned for something so pointless? Was all I could think. What's the worst? When I didn't answer, she had the audacity to stare at me as if I had wronged her. What was I meant to say, really? I had the impression that nothing I said would be sufficient to communicate with her. I didn't respond and went to sleep, simply laid there and stared at the ceiling while attempting to think. I must have dozed off at some point because when I woke up, my daughter was poking me in the ribs, beaming and joyful like children always are. She doesn't know. And pretending that nothing is wrong when my entire life has suddenly fallen apart has killed me. I tried to protect myself from going into a downward spiral by putting on my game face for her and driving her to school. I took a lengthy drive after dropping her off. Just driving, no destination. I needed air, distance. Something that would help me feel less confined. Lately, everything has simply been so heavy. Additionally, I reasoned that perhaps leaving the house might allow me to breathe easier. The issue is that this mess will be there when I return, regardless of how far I travel. It's strange how your mind can deceive you in such circumstances. I began to recall all of these events from years ago. She had been a bit late at times, and I had missed small details. A few aloof exchanges in which she would dismiss things or chuckle uneasily. I didn't give it much thought at the moment. I now feel foolish for failing to see the warning indicators and for not posing the appropriate queries. After a while, I stopped and sat for what seemed like hours on the side of the road. While I sat there, I wondered how we got here. I feel as like I don't really know the guy I married, even though we were meant to be creating this life together. Even worse, I'm not sure whether I'll ever get to meet her again. I didn't even want to enter my house when I eventually arrived. For long, I just stood in the driveway and gazed at the home, reflecting on all that had transpired here. All memories seem corrupted now, as if my perspective on all of things would never be the same. But ultimately, I had to enter. You can't just stand there all day, can you? My wife was waiting inside, obviously anxious, in the living room. She made another attempt to speak with me via the, "To make it a proper speech, I will stop at nothing." She even inquired as to whether we ought to attend treatment. However, I doubt that treatment will resolve this. I told her directly. This is something I'm not sure I can forgive. The words were frigid and weighty as they hovered between us. She appeared heartbroken, and while I may have had a slight twinge of remorse, I was primarily left feeling exhausted. In the end, I went back to the couch. Right now, I simply cannot bear to sleep close to her. The sound of her voice, the sight, even her perfume scent. Everything seems alien, as if she were a foreigner who happened to reside here. The oddest thing is that she's making a lot of effort. Furthermore, I'm not sure if it's out of guilt or a confused feeling of obligation. I quote, "V started to doubt everything because of this whole situation. Not only her, but also myself. Was I ever enough? Did I do something wrong or miss something? And those solutions may never come to me. Perhaps it is no longer even relevant." But I'm stuck in this nightmare right now, and I'm having trouble waking up. I suppose I'm simply living day by day. Attempting to determine what to do and where to go next. When my mind is racing like this, it seems hard to make a decision. This week has been difficult. Everything is weighty. I feel like I'm carrying a weight that will never go away. My wife has been circling about looking for solutions. As she states, it seems rushed. She keeps making these awful attempts to be amiable, such as preparing my favorite dishes, inquiring about my day, and even suggesting that we take a family vacation. She seems to believe that she can just divert my attention from the fact that she deceived me. However, I understand. Perhaps this is her attempt to express regret. When I don't give her the response she wants, it's difficult to sit here and watch her act as like nothing is wrong. She gets this expression of despair. It further exacerbates the situation because I feel bad about not returning anything to her. What does she really anticipate, though? Every small detail and every moment we had has been replayed in my mind. She has consistently been absent or late. The paranoia is beginning to creep in. I begin to wonder whether she had been keeping things from me all along, or if there had been other instances like this. In the midst of this never-ending cycle of mistrust, I received a text from Tom, an old friend of ours, asking whether there are any more skeletons ready to come out of the closet. He quote, "Es, one of those men that was there while we were in college. Not close enough to know all the personal details, but close enough to be a member of our group." Tom claims to have heard about our problems from someone. To be honest, I had no idea how to interpret the message. I then questioned him about his meaning. "I heard about the pregnancy thing," Tom responds. Are you doing all right?" My stomach sank, I swear. I'm assuming that this whole event was something that only my wife and I knew about, but somehow other people already know. When I asked him how he learned, he told me that he heard a few members of our college group conversing. And who revealed the information? It's Sarah, my wife's closest friend. Since college, Sarah and my wife have been inseparable. I mean it when I say inseparable. They act more like sisters than friends, communicate on a regular basis, and are intimately familiar with one another's lives. As it happens, Sarah knew what was going on and was compelled to share our personal problems with others. It's jumbled up now, but I'm not sure if she was seeking advice from my wife or if she just needed the gossip. Normally, I don't give a damn about what people think, but this struck a different chord. My wife's best buddy is ranting about this disaster while I'm still trying to digest it. She is aware since my wife informed her, and it brings up a whole other set of issues. What was it she said to Sarah? To what extent does Sarah know the story? Was she aware before I was? That night I confronted my wife about it. Every part of me wanted to start yelling, but I made an effort to remain composed. "Did you inform Sarah about all that's happening between us?" I asked her. She paused at first, averting her gaze as if she didn't want to respond. This week she excused herself by saying she needed someone to chat to because she was so perplexed and guilty. The only one who would comprehend was Sarah. Although she apologized, it seemed phony, as if she was only saying what I wanted to hear. "Is it not possible for you to keep this between us?" I asked, unable to control my annoyance. "Do you realize how embarrassing it is for others to know about this, regarding your actions?" She made an effort to reassure me that Sarah didn't mean any harm and that she was likely just worried when she brought it up. However, that did not alter the reality that this was our personal life, and she decided to share it with someone who clearly doesn't respect limits or privacy. I thought I had lost control of my own life at that point. But what really struck me was how much more Sarah knew than I did, and I couldn't help but wonder. I asked her outright, "Have you mentioned the first time to Sarah regarding the way you became pregnant with our kid?" The face of my wife went white. She stumbled for a while, clearly taken by surprise. Then she clarified that she was unaware of that. The hesitancy in her voice wasn't believable, but I kept it to myself. My thoughts were racing with potential solutions. What if Sarah is more knowledgeable than I am? What if my wife has also been deceiving her? Or worse, giving me a sanitized version of events while revealing the reality to her? My anger increased as I gave it more attention. I informed my wife that I did not want Sarah involved in our business going forward. I had had enough of her receiving life news and evaluating me based on her closest friend's opinion. "Keep Sarah out of this if you want to solve it," I warned her bluntly. "This is not a global issue. It's just between you and me." I couldn't get rid of the impression that it was too late, but she nodded, as if she finally took me seriously. Even if I wanted to move on from this, the harm was already done. Many individuals in the world are far more knowledgeable than they ought to be. Every time I go out in public, I get the feeling that someone is going to be observing me and assuming they are familiar with my narrative. Evaluating me. Something inside of me changed after this realization. More of that wall was broken down, containing all of my rage. Realizing that my life had turned into a twisted tale for others to analyze was much worse than my wife's treachery. That's a whole other level. For the remainder of the evening, I hardly talked to her. I remained in my nook and watched TV on mute. Simply absorbed in my thoughts. I was reliving all of these Sarah-related memories in my mind, the way she would chuckle at my wife's secret jokes. When they thought I wasn't listening, they would giggle and whisper. For years, I believed it to be innocuous friendship-related matters, just chicks hanging out. I'm not so sure now. I now question whether more was ever spoken than I was aware of. I felt worse than ever when I got up the next day. I had a vague discomfort in my chest that persisted. I tried to escape by going to work and throwing myself into my work, but I was hardly able to concentrate. I was preoccupied, suspicious, and wondering whether anyone could see that I was a complete wreck. Paranoia is a strange condition. It comes gradually, and before you know it, you're checking your shoulder to see whether someone is mentioning you. By the end of the day, I had decided that I needed to know what my wife had told Sarah, or anybody else for that matter, and I wanted to gather additional information. I can't proceed until I get the complete image, which is similar to attempting to put together a puzzle with missing pieces. I was compelled to check my wife's phone when I arrived home that night to see what she had been saying to Sarah. I am aware that it is incorrect. I can't sit in the dark like this any longer, but my tolerance is running low, so that breach of privacy isn't the answer. I'm ashamed of what I was about to do. However, desperation can occasionally push you beyond boundaries you would otherwise avoid. I was in such a state of disarray when I came home that night. I took my shot since my wife was upstairs with our daughter and had left her phone on the kitchen counter. I was aware that she would soon descend again. And I realized that sounds awful. But what other option did I have at this point? Every response she offered me, in my opinion, seemed diluted, as if she were withholding something. If she had been telling Sarah more than she was telling me, I needed to know. Or worse, if she was confiding in someone else. I opened the phone. My heart is racing wildly. Even though I'm not a snooper by nature, this whole event seemed like it had completely upended my life. I began by looking through her texts to Sarah, half expecting to see all of my darkest concerns shown in stark black and white, and half hoping to find nothing. I tried not to read too much into their talks as I scanned through them. Some of it consisted of the typical amusing memes and sporadic conversations about daily life and work. However, I then came across a series of texts from a few weeks ago, which was about the time she had begun acting strangely. It felt like a face slap. She received a message from Sarah asking if she had told him yet, he is entitled to the truth. What about my wife's reaction? She just replied in writing. I'm not sure how. He would be crushed by it. I took a little break from reading in an attempt to stop my mind from racing. I had a dread that would not go away, a bad sensation in my gut. It validated my long-held suspicions. She had been concealing the fact that there was more. As the text continued, Sarah essentially pushed her to come open, but my wife said that it wasn't time or that she wasn't prepared. It seemed as though she was only playing for time, dancing around the reality. Then I came upon one that almost stopped my heart. Sarah had texted him to ask if he was aware of everything. Would he ever forgive you, in your opinion? Everything. I couldn't stop hearing that one word. What did everything mean to her? Holding my breath, I sped up my scrolling in search of more. However, my wife's responses were ambiguous. She continued to sidestep Sarah's pointed queries, only informing her that she was unsure of what to do, because at the time, she feared losing our family. Across the room, I wanted to hurl her phone. It seemed unbelievable to me. She was nearly acknowledging that there were more levels to this than I'd even touched when she confided in her buddy about her guilt. What's the worst? Unless she was compelled to, she had no intention of coming clean. Her evasive responses to Sarah served as a constant reminder that she was more afraid of the repercussions than she was prepared to mend the damage she had caused. I heard her come down the stairs just as I was ready to put the phone down. I secured the phone. I put it back on the counter and made an effort to be informal. She probably realized something was wrong since my hands were still trembling. She seemed to realize that I had done something because she gave me a strange look. I simply dismissed it, got a drink of water, and like nothing was amiss. That night, I didn't speak to her. I was unable to. Those messages were all I saw when I looked at her disclosures and the sense that I had been purposefully kept in the dark. I was aware that I couldn't ignore this. However, addressing her directly without any concrete evidence would just result in further evasive responses and hesitant apologies. I had to figure out how to acquire the facts without allowing her to rewrite history. I made the decision to contact Sarah the next day. She appeared to know the entire tale, or at least more than I did, though I realized this sounds ridiculous. Sarah could be able to fill in the details if my wife was too afraid or hesitant to be honest with me. A message was sent to her. Kept things easy. I was only letting her know that I needed to discuss a few topics she might know. I needed no other explanation than that. When we met, she consented to meet. Sarah seems to have seen a ghost. She hardly gave me a look, as if she was aware of my greater knowledge than I disclosed. I wasted no time at all. I asked her directly, "My wife told you what? You understand what I mean when I say that she has been keeping things from me?" She hesitated at first. I wouldn't have it when she muttered that she didn't want to interfere with matters pertaining to privacy. When she began talking to others about my marriage, I warned her that she had already gone too far. I could see she was having trouble deciding what to say as her face flushed. Then she broke down at last. "Take a look." Taking a deep breath, she said, "She told me a lot. Most likely more than she ought to have." She continued by acknowledging that my wife had confided in her about past problems, including doubts and regrets that she said dated back years. Furthermore, there were many incidents. It seems that she had considered confessing more than once, but was afraid of the consequences. I became increasingly irate the more Sarah spoke. My spouse has been keeping a lot of things from me. Years of dishonesty, not just this one error. Sarah persisted in defending her friend's behavior, claiming that she was afraid and perplexed, but all I could hear was that my wife had been unfaithful for far longer than I had thought. Something Sarah said truly resonated with me. She said that although my wife didn't want to harm me, she felt like she was living two lives at times and had felt imprisoned. At that moment, I couldn't decide if I should be sad or angry. I had centered my life on one individual, whom I trusted beyond all others. Confessing to her pal that she wasn't content with our current way of life. I knew there was no turning back when I left that meeting. Any version of the truth she intended to give me would not suffice. I needed her to tell me everything, every little detail while looking me in the eye. What if she didn't? That would be my response then. She was waiting for me when I arrived home. She asked if we could chat right away, so she must have realized something was up. I suppressed the anguish and rage that was rising inside me as I gazed at her. "Okay, let's chat," I said her. However, I don't want excuses or half-truths this time. I mean it when I say that I want everything. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, even if she appeared to be a deer in headlights. Uncertain of where to begin, I took a seat across from her. Although I knew it wouldn't help, there was a part of me that wanted to yell and demand answers. Rather, I simply gazed at her, anticipating her to speak. "I don't even know where to start," she said after shifting uneasily and twitching her hands in her lap. "I had no desire to play games. Then begin by revealing what you have been concealing. No sugarcoating. Don't hold back. I've had enough of half-truths." Her fingers were fumbling with the hem of her shirt as she glanced down. She muttered, "I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It simply went out of control." "Gotten out of control?" With my voice hardly suppressed, I repeated. "The rage went too far. Doesn't account for months of concealing information from me and years of lying. I'm worthy of more than out of hand. I need specifics." She seemed to be attempting to fade away, shrinking into herself. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, though. She paused for a long moment before taking a big breath and spoke. Little messages were all that existed at first. Her voice trembled as she started. "It wasn't serious at first. I was lonely, under a lot of stress, and he simply did it. He paid attention. My hand was tightening, but I said nothing, allowing her to go on. I went here to hear the truth, not to hear her defend it. She continued, "And it eventually got out of my control. It didn't go where I intended it to. However, I'm not sure. I couldn't just stop because I was confused, and I believed I could manage it by keeping it apart. Then, however, things became more complex. In my mind, her words sounded like static. Her voice included a hint of resentment, as if she was angry that she had lost control of her circumstances. All I could hear, though, was betrayal after betrayal. I cut her off. "Have you ever considered telling me? Did you consider the possibility that I could have a legitimate interest in knowing?" When she did look up at me, her eyes were wet. "Well, I was afraid. If you found out, I knew you would abandon me. Furthermore, I didn't want to lose all we had worked so hard to create. You simply lied for years instead. How can you possibly defend it to yourself? I was unable to control my frustration. You were living a double life after I gave you all I had." Her tears came more quickly, but I remained unaffected. She wiped her cheeks and sniffed, trying to continue. "I am aware that I am not deserving of your pardon. I simply believed I could manage it without causing you any harm." "All right, I was mistaken. I was completely mistaken. It's a bit late for that, I agree." I retaliated by crossing my arms and feeling further distant from her. Even though I'd heard many excuses throughout my life, this one seemed meaningless. For a while, we sat in quiet. The air was heavy with the weight of everything. Almost instinctively, I then said, "What's the truth about our daughter?" Her face became white. "What are you saying?" Her voice was no more than a whisper when she requested. "You understand me perfectly," I answered, feeling my rage rising once again. "I received the DNA results. She isn't mine. I know that. Why then lie about that as well? Regarding our child, you couldn't even be truthful." She gave a trembling breath and her eyes grew wide. "I didn't anticipate you finding out, and I hoped that you would still adore her even if I didn't know that it would matter." It felt like a stomach punch. Not because I don't care about her. My voice cracked a little as I spoke. However, I based my entire existence on a falsehood. I thought she was mine because of you. You saw me connect with her, bring her up. I never once believed that I should be aware of the truth. I was at a loss for what to do. Her voice broke as she wept. "I was afraid you might go. Even if it meant keeping things hidden, I wanted us to be a family. A family is not that." My voice was as icy as I felt on the inside, so I fired back. "Trust, not lies and deceit, is the foundation of a family." She sobbed into her hands as she broke down. However, I sat there feeling nothing. In the past few days, everything I believed to be true about my life had been completely destroyed, and I was unsure of how to put it all back together. It seemed like everything I had worked so hard to establish with her over the years, believing we had a future together, had been torn away in an instant. I struggled to keep my composure and finally took a big breath. I said, "Look," in a more composed but still hurtful tone, "I have no idea what will happen next. I need time to analyze everything and decide what I want to do. But you must acknowledge your actions. You cannot simply ignore this and act as though it never occurred." She attempted to stabilize herself while wiping her cheeks and nodding. "I apologize. I acknowledge that I have wounded you. I'll go to any lengths to put things right." However, I felt in my heart that there was no turning back. There will always be this enormous distance between us. Know of how hard we tried to bridge it. I would never be able to forget this treachery. But I didn't say that. I couldn't look at her any longer, so I just nodded. The days that followed went so quickly. I maintained my distance, giving myself time to reflect about everything. Now, every memory we shared seemed contaminated, as if every happy moment were overshadowed by a black cloud. I wanted to cling to everything, must act as though this was only a nightmare. The other side, however, was aware that I had to confront reality. Ultimately, I made the decision I knew I needed to make. I told her that I couldn't simply move on as if nothing had occurred and that I needed time. After packing a few items, I left the house and spent some time with a buddy. When I left, she started crying, but I didn't turn around. I was unable to. The type of hurt I experienced is difficult to describe. The treachery and the falsehoods weren't the only things involved. Everything was at stake. The life I believed I had was gone. I thought that the only way I would ever be able to find myself again was to go away, to create a future free from the burdens of the past. I have no idea what the future holds for my kid. Nothing will ever change the fact that I adore her. However, I must determine what sort of connection will be founded on honesty rather than deception. All I know is that I deserve respect and honesty after everything. And perhaps one day I'll meet someone who shares my appreciation for those things. Story 3. My ex-wife chose to leave me after having an affair last year. Strangely enough, I was relieved when it occurred. Our marriage may have appeared to be happy on the surface, but it was utterly hollow on the inside. Because of the financial and emotional toll she had on me, I felt devastated for years. She frequently took substantial amounts of money out of my account, making it difficult for me to pay our payments. Every time I questioned her about it, she flipped the blame on me, saying that I wasn't making enough money. She never thought my efforts were good enough. She appeared annoyed or upset by anything I did. I would make an effort to schedule family outings or dates for us in the goal of spending time together. However, she never showed any interest. She would become agitated or complain, wanting to just sleep in bed. I eventually stopped attempting to involve her in anything, which naturally caused her to whine more. Despite her lack of enthusiasm in participating in the first place, she accused me of keeping the kids away from her. She eventually started staying away from home at night. When I questioned her, she became annoyed and told me it was none of my concern where she was, even though at first she would claim she was sleeping at a friend's house, someone I hardly knew. I was feeling conflicted when my ex-wife said she wanted a divorce. I was rather concerned about how my life would turn out following the divorce. On the one hand, however, I couldn't help but feel pleased that our terrible marriage was coming to an end. I took the time to thoroughly review every document that her attorney forwarded to me. As it turned out, her attorney was careless and made several errors in the documentation. Our divorce hearing was ultimately postponed by several months as a result of these mistakes. I would return the documents without signing them each time I saw an error. After then, they would need to be corrected and sent again by his office. However, they would frequently repeat their previous errors or create new ones. The documentation also had some really serious errors. My name was misspelled. Her name misrepresented our child's name and birthday, as well as both of our own. They misidentified our marriage date, named children who weren't ours, and even misidentified our home location. They featured businesses that weren't ours, dogs that weren't ours, and properties that weren't ours, even proposing a $500,000 payment for companies we didn't control. I thought it was hilarious that her lawyer's name was misspelled in one of the drafts. I was in the restroom and joked about it. Before they were able to correct the majority of these errors, it took around 7 revisions. However, there were still significant mistakes in the final document that was sent to the court. The sheer volume of errors and their simplicity made the entire procedure both stressful and somewhat humorous. Knowing that at least these misunderstandings were dragging things down and allowing me time to get ready for what was coming next helped to make a challenging situation a bit more tolerable. My ex-wife's attorney attempted to convince the judge throughout our divorce procedures that I should pay all court and legal costs, but I was able to refute this with a compelling argument. I made it clear that they, not me, were mostly to blame for the process's delays. The documentation they supplied me had so many mistakes that it took longer to correct everything. The judge did not order me to pay those costs as a result. My ex-wife moved in with the man she left me for after our divorce. As it happens, he has been abusive and is not a decent man at all. She abruptly stopped having access to my money after I changed all of my banking passwords. She was somewhat taken aback when she soon discovered how much she depended on my money to maintain her standard of living. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that she had been handling the payments for the house where we were staying, even though it officially belonged to her uncle because she was not paying. The bank nearly took the house away. Her uncle came to me in dire need of assistance. He informed me that I would have to make the back payments she had skipped, which came to almost $15,000 for 6 months of delinquent mortgage, if I wanted to remain in the house. I proposed purchasing the house from him since I didn't have that type of cash laying around. I was shocked when he said yes. The house that belonged to my ex-wife's grandma is now mine. The divorce has been finalized for a year. At work, I got promoted, and that came with a big pay raise. I'm still in the same house, and whenever I can afford it, I try to make changes. Although I haven't met a new partner, I've been having fun being single and meeting new people through online dating. In hindsight, it's almost comical that my ex-wife abandoned a secure relationship for someone who was very different from what she had anticipated, and that her actions almost cost her uncle his property. Although it didn't seem like it at the time, her choice to divorce me turned out to be a great benefit to me in a manner. When she discovers that the grass isn't greener on the other side, she may attempt to return to you. But keep in mind that you should never accept her back and don't allow her tears influence you. I'll give you the latest news now. It will be 1 year since my divorce was completed on November 3rd. Over the past year, I've made a lot of progress in bettering myself. I began going to a therapist who advised me to concentrate on my own development, and I have been doing just that. I lost more than 50 pounds after making dietary and activity changes. Since I've always loved soccer, I resumed playing on a regular basis and even began coaching my children's youth team. In addition, I rekindled my passion for reading and resolved to read a new book each week. At work, too, my efforts have paid off. It has been considerably simpler for me to care for myself and my child since I got a significant rise and a promotion. Even with all of these improvements, my ex-wife feels the need to rejoin our life. The man she believed would save her from our awful marriage has become violent in her most recent connection. He has been violent, and she was hospitalized for one particularly bad episode. We had to call for an ambulance because our toddler was with her at the time. My ex-wife won't face charges or acknowledge what happened, even in light of the evidence. However, the tale is evident from the bruises. I was at a family gathering just last night. They asked me over, and I've always gotten along well with this side of the family. Although I was courteous to my ex-wife, I avoided talking to her and maintained a safe distance. Her family, however, seems to have persuaded her that we are still in love, which is completely untrue. I was not satisfied at all, even if my ex-wife could have been content with our marital status. In the latter 2 years of our relationship, I became so reclusive and inattentive that it seemed like I was only there to provide her with more money. In the last year of our marriage, she exploited me both financially and emotionally. She was having an affair with someone else. She would always deny everything and go to his apartment if I tried to discuss her affair with her. She accused me of not being supportive enough when I eventually caught her red-handed. In actuality, though, I was giving her every penny I made after covering our expenses. Due to financial constraints, I hadn't even purchased new shoes or clothes for myself in years. Then she unexpectedly showed up at one of the soccer matches. She asked me whether I was ready to move back in with her after the game. I questioned her why in the world I would do anything like that since I was so shocked. She began by telling me all about how we are still in love. We have a child together, and we believe that raising them jointly will benefit them more. I had to be honest with her. I no longer had any love or trust for her. She still owes me more than $1,100 for fixing her car, and I even informed her of that. What did she say? If we moved in together, she promised to reimburse me. I couldn't contain my laughter at that point and simply started laughing. I doubled over because it was so hard. She broke down when she saw me laughing, which, to be honest, made me laugh even more. Perhaps it wasn't the most kind response, but after all I've gone through and all the work I've done to better myself, returning to her, the exact person who hurt me so much, seemed like the worst course of action. I would never do anything to break the bond between my child and his mother, who still has a lot of affection for her. If she needs to turn away, I think she'll take care of it on her own by acting accordingly. I was surprised when she proposed that we move back in together. She didn't express regret or give an apology for what she had done in the past. She simply suggested that we move back in together, pretending that she is doing something worthwhile. Her way of thinking is really somewhat bizarre. Then there is our toddler, who had to endure the heartbreaking experience of witnessing his mother in danger. That has the potential to have a profound impact on him. In order to keep him out of such a dangerous situation, I believe it's critical to attempt to obtain full custody. Once more. Now for my most recent news, I've met a very remarkable person. I hope we can all find our own forms of happiness, even though I know it will take time for everyone to recover from all of these occurrences. For me, the past year has been a roller coaster regardless of the choices we make with our relationships. On November 3rd, I commemorated the first anniversary of my divorce. Since then, I've been dating and concentrating on improving myself via treatment. Admittedly, I've met some amazing ladies, but I've also met a couple who weren't a good fit for me. My ex-wife saw a Facebook post from my girlfriend just this Monday. Distribute. We had a great excursion together over the weekend, and Cher had shared some pictures. We had a great day taking lots of interesting pictures, indulging in delectable cuisine, and enjoying a few beverages. I genuinely enjoy sharing, but I'm not generally the kind to take photographs of my dates. I was so pleased to comply when she requested whether she may tag me in photos of our vacation. I was quite certain there would be some trouble if I shared those pictures. However, my ex-wife and her family's response to me was really strong. To complete the image, let me give you a little additional background. Before we formally dissolved our marriage, my ex-wife had been unfaithful for more than a year. She moved in with her lover while our divorce was still pending, and she was already dating someone else before we split up. We have now been separated for a year. My ex-wife abused me during our marriage by manipulating me emotionally and financially. She is still abusive, unfortunately, but she became much more hostile and disrespectful to me after I shared those pictures. She fabricated the tale on Monday to make it appear like I was the one who had cheated. She bemoaned how embarrassing it was for me to make fun of her by posting images of me with other women on social media. She called me a coward for keeping the fact that I'm seeing other people a secret and accused me of being inconsiderate and selfish for not taking her feelings into account. She went so far as to imply that my actions had ruined any chance of us ever reconciling, claiming that my cheating ways destroyed whatever remaining love she may have had for me. She was yelling and scolding me on the phone during the entire time she was making these claims. In the meanwhile, I found her assertions' irony to be funny. Even though she was the one who cheated and was violent during our relationship, she spent a solid 30 minutes complaining that I had betrayed her and destroyed our relationship. I simply laughed. I told my ex-wife that I had been totally true and devoted until our relationship ended when she questioned me about my loyalty during our marriage. But she didn't stop there. She continued by asking me about my dating experiences following our split. That made me laugh even more. And because we are no longer together, I firmly informed her that she should not worry about my personal life. I told her she had no right to interfere in my affairs, just as I don't interfere in hers. In spite of my efforts to establish this boundary, she sent me a barrage of extremely nasty and abusive texts criticizing both Cher, my current girlfriend, and me. She also threatened to send Cher direct messages spewing disparaging remarks about my marriage. If she felt it would make a difference, I told her she may try. Cher must be a horrible person for allegedly ending a nice marriage, according to my ex-wife, who then stated that she wanted to see Cher in person to see what type of lady she is. I had to really doubt her grasp of reality at that point. She had an affair, left me for someone else, and filed for divorce, and I told her straight out that our marriage had ended more than a year ago. My ex-wife started weeping through her tears at this moment. She said that she had been hoping that we might make amends in some way. It's unjust, she protested. I had found someone else to spend time with and had moved on, urging me to concentrate on spending time with her and our child as though we were still a family. This entire exchange demonstrated my ex-wife's apparent inability to face the consequences of her own conduct, which ultimately led to the dissolution of our marriage and how detached from reality she had become. Recently, my ex-wife told me that she is dissatisfied with her partner and that he doesn't treat her properly. To be honest, this discovery didn't surprise me because I had long suspected it. But I don't feel any better after learning about her issues. In actuality, I no longer feel anything for her, and I have no desire to reunite with her. If we didn't have to communicate at all, that would be better. On the plus side, though, I'm having a great time right now. Cher, my girlfriend, and I have found happiness together. She makes my life so much more joyful, and I constantly look forward to seeing her. She is the first person I contact when I get up, and the final person I speak to before turning in for the night. In the near future, we even have another vacation planned. I know my ex-wife could react negatively if I share pictures of our vacation, but I believe that having a happy life is worth any criticism. I can now see that my ex-wife has consistently attempted to paint me as the villain, which is a textbook example of narcissistic conduct toward others who are offering me advice. You're correct. I should refrain from being drawn into lengthy, meaningless discussions with her and limit our contact to our child. And while I'm ready for the chance that she would attempt to disseminate false information about me, my main goal is to move on in a constructive manner. Let S take a moment to contemplate. March 21st, 2022 was the day when everything changed for me 2 years ago. Not only did I find proof of one affair that late in 2021, but I also found evidence of maybe more. I tried to patch things up for a year after 23 years of marriage, 2 biological children, and a stepchild. However, it was hard to continue attempting to reconcile because of her persistent problems with mental health, PTSD, substance misuse, and secretive conduct, such as discovering a second phone she was using. She shot me in the side of the bed, which was the last straw in our marriage. I took the decision to put a stop to things permanently after that awful moment. In April, I filed for divorce, and by June, everything was done. I felt a great sense of relief. I felt as though I had been granted another opportunity at life. I hadn't realized how much anxiety and worry I had been dealing with until then. I can see all the blunders I made after learning of her treachery in retrospect. I responded incorrectly. I hurried into attempting to mend our relationship without addressing the underlying problems, rather than taking the time to think things out. By the time we started treatment, we had made the grave mistake of delaying seeking help. It was too late to change anything already. I felt a mixture of sadness, rage, shame, and heartbreak, since our kids had already lost all regard for their mother. I felt like a zombie and was barely surviving each day. The amount of people who contacted out to give their support in April of last year was so overwhelming. Following the social media slander campaign, my ex-wife started on me. She accused me of everything, including rape, assault, and stealing a substantial sum of money. Naturally, she neatly omitted what she had done. In response, I posted a brief PSA claiming that none of the charges were accurate in order to clear my name. I hoped that others would be open to giving me the opportunity to establish my innocence, but I also understood if some individuals felt the need to keep their distance from me. I concentrated on bettering myself in the interim. I lost weight, going from 250 to 185 pounds. I also took on a new position that came with the promotion, which was a big professional step. I intended to use phone applications for casual dating in order to experience a summer of vengeance. A former high school friend contacted me at this period. She was going through a similar split after learning of her partner's infidelity and lived far away. We began communicating on a regular basis, giving empathy and support about 6 months after we ended up messaging one evening to catch up and share our experiences when I had to drive to Knoxville for work. As I spoke up how amazing the next 2 evenings would be, I had been looking forward to seeing some live music while I was there. However, my summer did not end up being as full with casual flings as I had jokingly envisioned, despite my original assumptions. Rather, a summer full of beach excursions, live music, and distillery tours took place. Because she really likes whiskey and just having a good time, which I hadn't done in years. As summer gave way to October, our bond became stronger. We were able to spend Christmas together, Thanksgiving with her family, meet one another's families, and even travel to Las Vegas for a long weekend of the Super Bowl. We became closer as a result of all these encounters. I am now very content as I celebrate my 52nd birthday. Since she's moving in with me, this birthday seems very special and wonderful, unlike the previous two, which were really difficult. She is a nurse who found work in my city in the South rather fast. She has made the decision to maintain her home and allow her daughter to rent it out. What if a buddy were in my shoes? I could have warned them that it's too soon and too much. However, it seems like the appropriate thing to do for us. We're not in a rush to get married or do anything similar. We're just two individuals that are fed up with juggling our schedules and losing time with one another. To find out if our relationship is as solid as we think it is, we are moving in together. Many individuals discuss karma or exacting revenge on their ex-partners on this site. In my situation, my ex continues to text me when intoxicated and frequently expresses her desire for us to be together. They're apologizing and accusing me of being the reason behind our separation. She apologizes half the time, but she still believes that I am to blame for everything else. In actuality, though, I'm happy now that she's gone. In addition to meeting someone amazing, I'm less stressed. She is incredible, much more than I ever thought I'd be with. She's also quite interested in me, despite my occasional concerns that it could be too wonderful to be true. Therefore, I believe that simply by leading a good life, I have already received the best kind of retribution. I want to tell everyone that even if the things that occurred to you due of your relationship or marriage were terrible, you can still go on and find happiness. Sometimes people are unaware of their blessings until they are gone. However, you may discover that you're better off once you've crossed over. I told you my tale to encourage you to persevere through difficult times. A new beginning is always possible. Never forget to prioritize yourself and believe in your capacity to bounce back and prosper. It is possible for things to go better. I proved that it's feasible at any age by starting a new one at the age of 50. That concludes the status report for today. Remember to like and subscribe if you're following along so you don't miss any more stories. Till the next occasion. Farewell.